Okay, good evening. I'm going to finish what I began a few weeks ago. These Hadrochos from the Rebbe, which frankly are quite fascinating. I hope you find it as well that way. Let me just pull it up on computer as well. Okay. So just to sum up, what I did was I broke it down into 10 main directives from the Rebbe. We covered most of them. We'll finish the last ones. What do we call it? The 10 were, just to go over the Kitzur. I can't find them. You see the list of 10 anywhere? Okay, I'll just go through this. I call them Shliach 10. So we have what I covered so far. Sources, everything with Makeda is grounded. Number 2 was heartfelt and sincere, Dvorim HaYetzim Min HaLev. Number 3 was lasting impact. In other words, it has to have hashpah that lasts on the makabel. 4 was initiative action, that everything has to come to some call to action, some takeaway, ma'aseh b'peil. Oh, here I have found it. Okay. The 5th was applicable and relevant, korev elecha, relevant. Then came clarity, carefulness, and precision. Diuk, hopeful and positivity, always a positive message, always focusing on the chiyuv. And now we're up to transformative, empowering, the last 3. So let's go through the last 3. It's page, I think it's page... Second. It's page, I think it's page 16 of the 18 pages that are on this WhatsApp. So here, the Rebbe writes like this. This is an answer to the Rebbe had Yechidus then with Rav Moshe Pinchas Alter, the Baal Pnei Menachem from Ger. He came to see the Rebbe. It was actually mamish now, the first order, Tovshim Mem Dalet. Okay. So Kemuvan, this was an interesting hanocha to make because it was him speaking with the Rebbe. So usually the hanocha, the Rebbe is the only one that's speaking. Here we also have the Rebbe engaging with another individual. So I didn't make this hanocha, someone else did, but when they made it, they wrote it like the Rebbe speaking to a yochid, not necessarily to a manik. So the lashon was the Rebbe was very machpid that the way he wrote it was not a way. It was a way of like authoritative. So the Rebbe writes these words: Nizharti ledaber betur hatzah v'sheina v'hafocha lepkuda v'chulu v'chulu. And throughout the Haggadah, the Rebbe corrected a bunch of different places where it sounded like the Rebbe is right, saying you must do this or you should do this, and the Rebbe changed min haroi or b'derech hatzah or l'cheira ulai. This is not a small matter. It seems to be a very Yisraelistic thing in the Rebbe's Hadrocho, and not only with a person who's not a chassid, a Chabad chassid, but with everybody. And that's why I titled it Empowering, Transformative and Empowering. So you all know that one of the most I would say popular, one of the most powerful themes that the Rebbe focused on throughout the Nesias was Aveda B'Keach Atzmei. Right in the first Maimer Bas Legani, right in the first Farbrengen, right after the Maimer Bas Legani, the Rebbe said, everything has to be Aveda B'Keach Atzmei. The Rebbe says, Jalven helfen means the Rebbe will not deny helping, but you have to do your work. And this became a klal gadol throughout the Rebbe's Nesias. There was never a change in this. Throughout Mamish. So you'll know the famous sichos from Baal Escha. What was the Rebbe's Rashi, the first Rashi in Baal Escha? Doesn't say Hadrocho. Why does it say Baal Escha? So Rashi says, L'cheira hadlokas hanedes, not halos hanedes. Allah means to lift them, to raise. So he says, because the mitzvah was, Acha tehei shall have us elam elel. So the Rebbe asked so many sichos, and what's the big thing? Yes, it takes a second. We see when you light a flame, if you don't wait, it could burn out. So the mitzvah is you should stay there till the flame burns on its own. So the Rebbe asked the question, what's the big payda? So what? Let's say it burns out, the worst scenario. So the Kohen Gadol goes back and lights it again. You have to change a word in the Torah from Hadrocho to Baal Escha. So the Rebbe explains, not just Al Pi Halacha, but also in Ashkofa, that the whole idea of Aveda is Hadlokas and Hadlos Hanedes. You know, lighting Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom, Ner Mitzvah V'Teira Eir, Chinuch, Neres Lahoyer, to illuminate another. So there's two ways that you can educate someone. One way is you shine the light. That's beautiful. They're in darkness, which darkness could also mean beruchnius. If someone is living in ignorance, they say einani ela bedas, and you do is you're educating them, you're machanech them, you lighten up teira eir, ner mitzvah teira eir, and you give them the right hadrocha and direction and so on. But there's another deeper way, because the first way, what I just said, what's possible is that you give them light. But what happens if you are not there anymore? If the mashpia is not b'mkemei of the makabel, will the light continue to burn? Comes the second way, which is much more than just passing on information. You're not just giving the student data and knowledge and yedias. You're teaching them how to learn, not just what to learn, but how to learn. What we call methodology. That this flame that you lit, you didn't just light it. You make sure it can burn on its own even when you're not there anymore. The diuk in the Mishnah, v'himidu talmidim harba. What's himidu? It's not yilmadu, yichanchu, v'shenantem. Hamidu means that they're standing on their own feet. And that's the real Even HaBeichen of the true pu'ula of chinuch. Not that you teach someone they have a lot of knowledge, but that when the mashpia is not there, and this person is faced with a problem, they have the tools to find an answer. Not just you gave them the answers. Which was, again, the Rebbe, I remember so many times when we wrote Sichos and Anochos, very often you could see that the Rebbe would write something, but he always wanted that we should do our effort instead of the Rebbe giving us the full answer. So many times the Rebbe answered, but there were times, I may have mentioned this in Nun Aleph, was the last Baal Escha Le'es Ata the Rebbe spoke to us. So as if I bring a mamash about this theme, it's Muga Baal Escha Nun Aleph. It's a very deep sicha, where the Rebbe goes back and forth, shall have a selah me'eleha. The Rebbe says, l'cheira, it's not really me'eleha. The Kohen Gadol lit it. It's now burning, yes, on its own, but if the Kohen Gadol had never lit it, it would not have burned on its own. So the Rebbe went into the whole discussion of b'chira chavshis. At the end of the day, the Eibishter gives us b'chira chavshis. So is that really b'chira? And then he also gives us life. And mi agdimani v'ashalom, the Medrash says, that who gives us the tzemer, the mitzvah tzitzis, everything we have, mamayla. The only thing we have to do is fulfill it. So in Indian, you could say, what kind of me'elah? It's not really me'elah. Everything comes from the Eibishter's keiches and brachas. And the Rebbe went back and forth. Is it b'keach atzmei? Is it Mulmaila? And it was a very dakasdika discussion. So after Fabreng on Sunday morning, I wrote a bunch of questions to the Rebbe, which we did all the time to clarify. I wanted to get as much clarity as possible. Is it Mulmaila? Is it Mulmata? How much is it Mulmata? What is it Mulmaila? Anyway, the only time the Rebbe answered in this way that I'm going to tell you now was very interesting. The Rebbe gave out it was 2 pages of questions. The Rebbe gave it out. On the side, he wrote, Kol Neseis Vadus. The whole theme of the Farbrengen is, Shall have a Selim Eleha. And you're asking me to answer your questions. That's what the Rebbe wrote. He never wrote anything like that before. Always the Rebbe would answer. Sometimes he would give a chelik. Why didn't you chapzach an answer? Or you missed the main point. The Rebbe said, the Mishpal Tahar, the Rebbe's different l'shenis. But here, that's what the Rebbe wrote. Now, Kimuvin and Poshet, the Rebbe wrote it, we accepted it, but we didn't want our answer, we wanted the Rebbe's answer. And I always thought to myself, why didn't the Rebbe just answer? And interesting, of course, next year, let's say this was Ba'aleischa, you're talking now, month of Sivan, Tammuz. So basically, by Oder Chav Zayin Oder Nun Beis, we realized the Rebbe had the stroke, and then a little more than 2 years later was Gimel Tammuz. So I thought to myself, Sistama Hergish, that maybe the Rebbe was in a way preparing us and saying, look, I gave you all the keches you need, like he said in Chav Ches Nissen. Was merkenich tar. I gave you everything you need. Now you have to do something. So the Rebbe wasn't Chaz v'Shalom saying to us, you can answer the question better than I can. He was saying, you have the keches. And in a way, the answer itself was a keach, and a sin is keach. That the Rebbe said that you can do it, shalavis me'ela. And I'll tell you something, the more I thought about it, it actually was the answer to the question. The Hagufa is the answer. Hagufa, that I'm giving you the keches, but you have to find the answer, was a way answering the whole issue, and it helped me finish the Sicha Muge. That was Magir, the Sicha. Probably some of the Hagos were also in the Kivun, but bottom line is that this was always the big Yesod. I remember once by Farbrengen, by Chassidim. I was a Bocher in 770, so who was Farbrengen? Shmuel was there, I think. So Jacob, maybe Shmuel may have, he passed away in Amadal, I'm not sure. Abisol Jacobson was there, no relation to me. L'chaim Eliyahu Simpson was there. A few others of the Elterich Chassidim at the time. And Rabbi Jacobson told the following vart or story, that he said that the Frierdiker Rebbe once said, "At the Zayde had geheißen." The Tate, meaning the Rebbe Rashab, had gebeten. Und der Zayde had geheißen, the Tate had gesagt, und bet. And then he went on and said that the Rebbe doesn't even bet. What he does is he calls you in, and Kavyochel zich misyayitz. He wants an eitzah. And he said at the end, he said, the Rebbe's bet na eitzah is starker with the Rebbe Marash is hasten. It was the Rebbe Rashab beferish, Rebbe Marash beferish. It was mitzvah. He said, do this, do that. The Rebbe Rashab asked. The Rebbe Rashab said. The Frierdiker Rebbe asked, and the Rebbe just asked for eitzah. As Kavyochel, you're a partner. And he said, that's even stronger than the Rebbe Rash's tzivui. So this was the Rebbe's approach. I remember seeing a zettel once, very interesting zettel. Someone wrote to the Rebbe that he's looking for a derech to increase in his kashrus. And being that it can't do it ba'ava, he needs to know how to do it b'yira. Ubafrad, that the Rebbe's personality, he writes, is a demanding one. I forgot the lashon he used. Like the Rebbe is very tough, so to speak. I'm trying to remember what lashon he used. I don't know who wrote this. Must have been Elter the Chos. It doesn't sound like a young person would write that. And so we write to the Rebbe. The Rebbe circles the word biyira and writes number one. Imkenu be'emes, that you want biyira, so bevade yesef b'teira mitzvahs b'teich yiras shamayim. Okay, you want yiras, so fine. So I add in teira mitzvahs yiras shamayim. Then comes number two, where he writes that the Rebbe's personality is not kosher. He writes something strong, a very strong word. So the Rebbe circles the Rebbe's personality, Tchunas HaNefesh, whatever, I forgot what and the Rebbe writes, Me'elam eineni makir ish zeh. I'm saying about himself. I don't recognize this person you're talking about. Ukiyadua, sheineni machriach mishuhu be'ezeh shuhu inyan. So the Rebbe wrote. You do it, the Rebbe does not force anyone to do anything. So it's interesting, tzattel belavachi, but it's back to this theme. So you would think what the Rebbe was afraid to ask, was afraid to tell. You look at the Fabrengens, you'll see. The Rebbe says, Bakosha nafshis. He has all kinds of lashenas the Rebbe has. But the Rebbe's avoided commanding, and Bapashtas, the reason is, like he says here in this answer, the Rebbe was looking to empower people. He wasn't looking to command people. Why the Eibishter says, V'yidaber Hashem mishalim etzav es b'nei etzav? That's the Torah. The Rebbe's approach, he wanted people to own, Eifem Pnimi, what he asked of them. So yes, the Rebbe made it very clear what he wants. That was not ambiguous. There was no confusion there. Was the kasha, were you going to embrace it or not? That's up to you. Kav Yochel, so to speak. And even the words Chav Ches Nissen, what did the Rebbe say? Ich getan out, was mehr kann ich tun, weiß ich nicht. Der einzige Sache, was ich kenne, ist übergeben das zu euch. Purim Mem Zayin, same Teichen. So what comes away from this is not a weaker connection, it's a deeper one. Look, let's be honest. Now it's 26 years since Gimel Tammuz. Had the Rebbe commanded people, and they never had owned it, they say you have to own your decisions. I don't know what would have been after Gimel Tammuz. A lot of people would say, you know what, the Rebbe hired me, paying me. I didn't really work on this myself. The Rebbe appointed me. And that's it. Now that the Rebbe Begashmer is not here, time to quit, time to go home. You know, everybody asks that big question. You don't have the Rebbe Begashmer. How's Chabad running? The answer is because the Rebbe created Shalheva Selim Elah. People who are empowered and they own their shlichus. They're not just angestellte. The Rebbe always brings the Lashon Esek B'Teira. Teirosam Noseh. A job is you work from 9 to 5 and then you go home. You're not the boss. You don't sleep about. You don't think about it 24/7. You don't go to sleep with all your issues of the work. You get your job done. Pay my paycheck and I'm home. I'm going home. A person who's a balabos or a shutif is not shaykh to that. He's always thinking that it's his asik. It's his inyan. Teirase umnose. That's his job. It's not just a superimpose, a dover nesef. It's be'etzem muhusei. Once it's be'etzem muhusei, it's a very different story. So you could say, Taka, the derech tzara v'arucha would be just tell somebody what to do, but the derech arucha tzara that will last is you make sure that they figure out what to do, and they make sure that they do it kemuvan mechuvan to the kavana elyena, but that they have owned it. It's a very different story. In chinuch, that's the simple even abechen. You know, hopefully you're going to be mechanech many people, children, adults. The only even abechen is what happens once you finish teaching them. When you're teaching them, if you're a good teacher, you'll be inspiring. You can engage them, and get them excited and all that. But what happens the day they leave your classroom or the day they leave your shir? Will they continue and to learn and teach? Will they have been changed that they themselves are empowered? So this is one answer among many. It wasn't just the Rebbe was not careful not to Hanocha shouldn't come out as if he's commanding Pinchas Menachem Al to do something. It was a closed kehirah of how we communicate with each other. So that's number 8 of the 10. Transformative and empowering. Okay. Any questions, my friends? Good. This one is Meridik one. They're all Meridik, but this one is very unique. This is number 9. This is about sensitivity, empathy. Sensitivity. You know what empathy is? It's not just rachmanis. Empathy means that when you're communicating with someone, you're sensitive to them. You're not just getting up and giving hadrocho, mamayel lamata. You're sensitive to the makabel and where he is at and how he hears it and so on. Even though it overlaps maybe with some others, but this is unique. So I found this settle was not to me, but I just found it very powerful and unique in its way of of explaining. The Rebbe is dealing with someone who wrote to the Rebbe that how do you speak to a student? This is in this case a student, but it could be with anyone, and you're not getting across to them. How do you, you're talking to someone and you're trying to make a point, and they're not getting through to them. So what do you do? So here's the Rebbe's lashon. Bichdei lashpia al mishahu. This is a ksav yad. I'll read it, then I'll translate and explain. Bichdei lashpia al mishahu ubefrat al hanoyar b'tkufasenu. In order to be mashpia, I'll translate it already. In order to impact on someone, or specifically al hanoyar b'tkufasenu, on the young of our generation, or our period, our time period, tzarich liyos hadiburim oikama pamim, requires that the speaking with this person should be a number of times, ubeprotius, and in detail, hadrocho, and the necessary detail. In other words, not just once and not just in general. To speak in detail what's necessary to get through to this person. Ube'efen, there's more to know him. Sha'azokuk la'ashpa, that the one who is in need of ashpa, in other words, mekabel, yargish atzmei chofshi, lizvakeach ulanis, that the person you're speaking to should feel, the person who needs ashpa should feel free to argue and to respond to you. In other words, you're not just commanding him and telling him things to do. He should feel free, chofshi, yargish atzmei chofshi, lizvakeach, to argue with the mashpia, ulanis v'chulu. Okay, you don't see that very often, but this the Rebbe writes. I'll explain afterwards, but it's pretty common sense, but still to hear it from the Rebbe, it gives you a lot of, it gives you more confidence and takeoff to do this. Then he goes on. If you're going to introduce this person who needs ashpa to someone who doesn't recognize him, who doesn't know him, a stranger, let's say a student, you want someone to talk to him, and you introduce him to someone, that someone does not recognize this student, they don't know each other. The ain't call of sharia sanal, and you don't have the possibility to do all the above, which means to speak kama pomim or baprotis and the efresh hazokuk, that he should be able to respond and argue. Olul gam chaz v'sholem lahazik. Not only can it not help, it could also possibly, God forbid, damage the situation. So in other words, it's not mehechetesa, you have nothing to lose. If you hook up this guy that needs ashpa with someone that's the wrong person, who doesn't know him, and doesn't have all these conditions above, it's also possible to cause damage. Why? The Rebbe explains why. Kiven sheyana, because this potential mushpeh can answer, can argue, kvar nivgash, v'kvar shama. I already met someone, and I already heard all his kindness to me. In other words, if you set him up with someone that is not appropriate, you can lose. Why? Because he won't want to listen anymore. He'll say, you set me up with someone, I met him, I heard what he had to say, and it was Yetzer. The Kal Lahoven. And this is it's easy to understand, it's obvious. Therefore, the person who we're talking to, the Rebbe is answering to, in other words, to find someone to mashpia on that person, on this student, or noyar, can't say student, he says noyar, young, could be a teenager, it could be. Your responsibility, basically, is to find those that will fit the conditions that I wrote before, how you communicate with this person. And to make an effort, and make effort that the person speaks to Mashpiyu should influence him, should have ashpa on him through speaking a number of times. Then the Rebbe writes, Hashemus, Askelatzin, Lahazir Amitzurabuz. So there's a few things here that you don't see very often in the Rebbe's comments. Number one, even though it totally makes 10 sense, you see here the word of besides empowerment that I mentioned in the previous point, you see the sensitivity. So with you could say, what's wrong if you're a nice guy and you're the mashpia, you're telling him what the facts are. Why should you give him the right to argue with you? Who knows what he's going to say? He can say all kinds of things, hepachatera, or other things. Your Indian is to give him a psak, like a rov. So I can move him atzmei why that won't work. First of all, he didn't appoint you to be his rov. Second of all, nobody appointed you. You're trying to be mashpia on him, trying to influence him. How well will it work if he hears from you, listen, let me tell you the letter of the law, this is what God wants, and if you don't do it, you'll be punished. I'm just saying my own words here. Obviously, you're not going to reach him. The point is you want him to listen, that sees that, number one, you're listening to him, or her for that matter, and that you are responding. You let the person speak openly. The Rebbe says clearly, Yargish atzmei chofshi. He should feel free to communicate. What are you doing? You're respecting him. You're showing, I want to hear what you have to say. I'm not just here to tell you things. I want to hear what's on your mind. This is a klal in every area. Parenting, mechanchim, shlichus, hashpah, anything. Always critical that you have to be sensitive to the person because you want them to know that, first of all, you care about them, but also you want to hear what's bothering them. I can tell you from personal experience many, many times. Parents who have good intentions in mind, kavanosim netzuya, but they don't know how to speak to their children because they only know how to do is bark orders. Even done nicely, they know how to give orders. They don't know how to listen. And a parent will say, what do you mean? Why? I have to listen to my child? I'm the parent, he's the child. But that's not how it works. We're not talking about a 1-year-old, a 2-year-old. We're talking about a teenager. You're talking about someone who is an independent person, is growing into an adult. You want to be able to listen. You want to be able to see that you're listening. And it's not a game. The Rebbe doesn't say here, you put on a show. The Rebbe is speaking as this is the way to be. That's one very critical point, which, as I said, everybody can be taught this lesson. Everybody can learn from it, because many of us don't do that well. We may give good hadrocho. Some people don't even know how to do that. But let's say you're even good, but you have to also be able to let the person speak back to you. I remember once sharing this with someone who he was going to a college campus. And he said to me, what happens if they speak back to me and they tell me something I don't know? I don't have an answer for. So I said, so 1 second, what are you telling me now? You're going to have a conversation with them and they may surprise you with something you didn't. So that's good. Then you could tell them, let me think about it. I'll get back to you. Oh, he says, it's a nice idea. I said, exactly. Since when are you going as a one-time mission? You go. You want to have a hemshach with them. The Rebbe says, that's the next thing I want to lead to. Pamim rabbis. It's not just repeating it again and again to hakarain the message. It means have a relationship with the person. One-time conversation, very often, especially important issues, you don't just change people's minds. So the Rebbe says twice that you have to talk about it, the pratis hadrocho, and then later he says, pamim rabbis. That's the second point I want to take out. And third point, that not everybody is masim. The Rebbe says clearly that if someone doesn't fit, they can actually cause damage. So you have to be very careful who you're going to introduce this person to. It says clearly, it says like this, I love limtze ke'elish yasimu le'efen hanal. So you need someone that's masim. Not everybody knows how to do it. I think this settle alone is so filled with so many eros and hashpah and hadrocho that you can mamish make this yesod. So I can talk more about it, but I think that covers it. It's an interesting settle. I don't know the background behind it entirely. I received it. I just recorded it. I saw it being a Yesodistic thing. I think it's very, very powerful in so many ways. And I see the Rebbe underlines Lizvakeach Ulanes. He underlines those two words. I just noticed. In the Pinuach, they don't have the underline, but in the Ksav Yad, it's underlined. Obviously, you can read it and study it yourself and come away with all the different lessons. And finally, number 10. Number 10, I call nuance and subtlety. I mean, earlier we spoke about precision, diuk. Nuance and subtlety is a shtickle different. Nuance and subtlety is basically recognizing the gray areas. Not just being bediuk, but also there's gray areas. I can tell you from the Rebbe's Hagos, even things like controversial things like Mashiach. You know, I hear this all the time. I remember when my book was published, Torah Meaning for Life. So I didn't want to write about the controversy. I felt the book should be reflecting the Rebbe's Tatus, the Rebbe's Heiros, presented in a universal way. But the publishers insisted, they said, since people are talking as the Rebbe Mashiach or not, they want me to add at the end something. I really fought with them. I said, I don't think it belongs. I think this book is meant to let people be exposed and introduced to the Rebbe's ideas. And then it's a separate book. It's a separate discussion. The Rebbe is Mashiach, not Mashiach. But they really insisted. I was going to fight with them. So I wrote what's called a prologue at the end of the book, epilogue. Prologue is before the book. Epilogue. And I wrote, the Rebbe is the Rebbe Messiah, question mark. And I wrote, I didn't want to write about it, but the publisher insisted. So I'll answer the best way I can answer. If someone had asked the Rebbe whether he's Mashiach, what do you think the Rebbe would answer? He'd say, "Mein afkamina lepel." If it compels you to add in Torah mitzvahs, if it doesn't, why do you ask me this question? The Rebbe would never answer a question like that, yes or no. Or he'd say, you have to go to the Eibishter based. So I wrote more or less something like that. And that ultimately the Rebbe would want you to learn his teachings, learn Torah, be Mekayim mitzvahs, Vedas Atfilah, all the things, and then see what make your decision. The Rebbe's not going to tell you whether he's Mashiach or not. Anyway, I get a call from Australia, like a few weeks after my book was published. I remember Nun Hey. And who's on the phone? Rab Chaim, my friend from Yeshiva in Maristan, Rab Chaim Svi Groner. No, son of Yitzchak Groner in Australia. Rabbi Yitzchak Groner was still around. Nun Hey, it's Nun Hey. And he says to me, I'm just coming from a Sheva Brachas. And I know it's late by you, but I must have an answer. I just was in a major vikuach with the Yossel Gutnik, and he says, see, Simon wrote Beferish in a safe book, the Rebbe is not Mashiach. I said, no way. He may not have written the Rebbe is, but he didn't write the Rebbe is not. So he says, I went right away to the book. It was a new book, just came out. A few of us have copies. And I read it, and it's mashma to me, you're saying that he is? So you want to know, which one is it? So I was mamish b'simchi g'deila. I said, I feel like I'm bedugma shalamayla. Because people look at the same sikh of the Rebbe. This one says that state beferish as yad Mashiach, and this one says beferish nish. So therefore, that's where we stand. You'll have to figure it out yourself. That means I wrote it in the right way. People argue about it, because if everyone saw in the sikhs beferish beferish nish, how could you disagree? Now, this is quite intentional. In the sikhs, it says clearly, in Nun Aleph, Nun Beis, from Chassam Sefer, from Zdei Chemed, from the different Bartanura and Rus, that the Nosi Shebedeir is the Mashiach Shebedeir. Elamai, the Eibishter decides when Mashiach comes, and if it's the right time, then comes Nizgala, another Neshama in him, or the different L'shein is there. And there, the Nosi becomes Mashiach, but it doesn't have to be. It could be Cheskes Mashiach and not Mashiach Vadai. That's the Sikh. So obviously, every Chassid who reads that knows Nosi Ador is the Rebbe. So 2 + 2 = 4. The Rebbe doesn't have to say, I am Mashiach. He says the Nosi Ador is Mashiach. The Rebbe is the Nosi Ador. There you go. But the Rebbe never says it, I am. You're never going to find such a lashon. At most, you're going to find this Kfei Dushas Meiri V'chami Admur is Mashiach. That's what the Rebbe added. And I can tell you, seeing the Hagos of the Sikhs, very many times, if it said the Mashiach Shabbatar, the Rebbe right away would add, Chak Muchad Mur, Kfei Dushas Meiri V'chami. I'm not getting into what the pshat in that means. You could say that means the Rebbe said that by the Sfarim, as he means himself. But that's already, but in the Sikhs printed, you're not going to find black and white, because the Rebbe didn't want it to be black and white. Chayesar Nun Beis, everybody knows the Sikh to the Kinus HaShluchim, where the Rebbe says, he starts that the Vedas HaBerurim is geendigt, Vedas HaShlichus is again, gets bleibt nur ein Sach. The Kabel Pnei Mashiach Tzidkenu. Everybody debates, what does that mean, that Sikh? What does it mean? What means Kabel Pnei Mashiach Tzidkenu? At the end of the Sikha, when the Rebbe speaks the Eirah Lepel, so there's a famous paragraph. That's where it says the Eifan HaMiskabel, that's the L'shenis. So I prepared that on that Sikha for Hagah. And I know the Rebbe always wanted, as I said, in writing, he wanted things as clear as possible. So what we remember from the Fabrengen, the Rebbe said, obviously, how do you prepare for Gula? Lilma Dinyani Gula Mashiach, Teresh B'Ksav, Teresh B'Al Peh. And in the Rebbe's Asis, it wasn't 100% clear one way or the other. Does that include also learning who is Mashiach? So I can't tell you, when we heard it, the Rebbe didn't mamish say those words, but he spoke about it. That the Nasi Adar is Mashiach Shabbat. So when I wrote the paragraph, I wrote that. Lil Medinyanei Gu'ula. I remember all the Lashenis. Vosh is Mashiach and Ver is Mashiach. The Rebbe crossed out Ver is Mashiach. He fixed the paragraph and wrote Lil Medinyanei Teresh B'Ksav and Teresh B'Al Peh and the Rambam and Chassidus about Dinyani Gula Mashiach. He crossed out Ver is Mashiach. And that's where he also wrote, that's where the word Beifan and Meskabel, I think the Rebbe actually said in the Fabring. Again, I remember every mamish the Lashenis, but that's the Teich. Now, when you see the Hagah, you see right away. Why didn't the Rebbe leave Ver's Mashiach? So you could say, because the Rebbe doesn't want anyone going and pointing, Marabet's boy, or this is an optional thing. The Rebbe was saying what's a vadai, that you should learn, and you should live by it. The Ver's Mashiach doesn't say anywhere in mitzvah that you have to identify who's Ver. So the Rebbe didn't want that to be in the Hira. In the Sikha itself, a few pages before, it says clearly the Bartanura, what I said, the Chsam Sefer, that Nosi Adar is Mashiach Shabadar. But there's two different things. A fact doesn't mean Hira. The fact that the Nosi Adar is Mashiach Shabadar doesn't mean that's the Hira, that you have to go be mafarsim that. So I know the Sikha question, when people ask the question, what about Sheftim Nun Aleph? My point here is, we already spoke about Mashiach. I'm not going to go into Mashiach. My point is the subtleties. That the Rebbe made things sometimes, he didn't want it to be black and white. He wanted it to be open for interpretation. However you want to explain it. And I could tell you that hundreds of cases like that. Now, most of us would think the other way around, that the Rebbe would make it so clear, there's no room for interpretation. It's not correct. So that leads me to a zettel the Rebbe wrote once. I think I mentioned this, maybe I didn't. I once wrote to the Rebbe that by Chazorah, we had different opinion of how pshat in the Sikha. And I wrote one opinion, or some of us had, and the other opinion. It was very different ways of pshat of the Sikha. And the Rebbe wrote these words. He said, V'yesh lema b'zeh oid dalet hei pirushim. That's what the Rebbe said. So not only didn't he answer these two, he said there's another 4 or 5. I remember we broke our heads what other 4 or 5 ways you can explain it. But the Rebbe said it. If you really want, Kepatish Yefetz Etzele, you can go Shivim Ponim L'Teir. The Rebbe brings that. Shivim, that's a lot of different ways. What do you see from this? Why can't the Rebbe just say one way? Because it's not that way. Shmai V'Avtanyan spoke, Shammai heard Isur, and Hillel heard Mutter, Asur, and Hillel heard Mutter. It's not unheard of. The same teachers. You learn something, there's nothing wrong with sometimes things are not 100% spelled out. And that's why they could be 2 days. When it comes to psak halacha, obviously, avai imei halacha kemese, you can't have a psak that is both mutter and asr. It's either halacha kishamei, halacha kihila, or the other machlekes in the Gemara. But a svaras hadavar, like you have 2 svaras that are elev divrei lekim chayim, which is also a lesson b'chlal in life. That, you know what, there could be 2 svaras, maybe one, you have to only do one psak, but it doesn't mean there's no merit and there's no value in the other svara. There absolutely is. As a matter of fact, a svara hafchis could make a birur, a libun hilchasa, a klorkite, even in the svara that's opposite, because it challenges it, and you have to force to be malavim the inyan, to look deeper, crystallize it, make it clear. That was one. There's also a zettel. I wrote it. I didn't have the extra ksav when I did this. What the Rebbe once wrote, we asked the Rebbe a bunch of questions of Chassidus, and here one of them is here that I do have the ksav yad, which I'll read in a minute. And the Rebbe said we asked a stira between 2 maimorim. And one maimor it says that in the Psadar Galifnei Tzimtzum is this. Another maimor says like that. So the Rebbe wrote, Chassidus lo inyane l'kveya masmeris, ki'im gili divrei lekim chayim. In other words, Mesmeris means to establish like a shrek, like when you build a house, it has to be measured exactly how big the wall is going to be and how long, and you knock the nails in. The Kveya Mesmeris, you're not coming to be Kveya Dargis. It's not an encyclopedia. where everything has to be exactly defined. You can have one mimer speaks like this, and another mimer speaks like that. And it may be l'chatchila stira, or it could be metavichet, or you can't. There's places it says, v'yesh mimer shemrim b'ayrayin be'ifanacher. It's not unheard of in Chassidus that you have a beer one way, then a beer be'ifanacher. Sometimes, again, you could be metavich, sometimes you can't. Sometimes you can reconcile, sometimes you can't. This teaches you, when we were in yeshiva, we all hated the answer the mashpiyim would give us when we asked them. They say, "Ventzach v'umeret." Remember that? As ventzach v'umeret. Say, is this Atzilus or the Bria? Ventzach v'umeret. So we always thought it was like a joke, And then you get older, you realize that that's the truest answer, because things are not always black and white. It depends who you're talking and what you're talking, the matzav advarim, etc. So here's finally a zettel. This I was zeichet to receive this chelik, but also as usual, the Rebbe would give a chelik and then he would be megala nayed yonim chassidus. So here, if you have this last one on page 18, we asked the Rebbe. This was I think the Mem Beis or Mem Gimel. We asked the Rebbe a whole stira about Tainug and Ratzon. I'm not going to go through the whole skull of it. That some places it says Ratzon is higher, some says Tainug is higher. But the Rebbe spoke in a way that always Einig is higher and didn't leave room for the other Svara. The Rebbe said the fact that it says in Sefer Yetzirah, Ein l'mayla me'einig, so in Samach Vav, that's a raya that nothing higher than Einig. The Rebbe says it's not negay. You can't be maskana from the Sefer Yetzirah. That's what the Rebbe said. Okay. So we brought the stira from the different places of Chassidus. So here's what the Rebbe wrote. Kama v'kama mekushyaseim ba'ovar. Ushal kiyetze b'zeh. Hein b'signan hanal. Some of your questions, a number of your questions in the past are in this signet. I say something in a fabrengen, and you bring me a raya or a stira from another mimer. U'ba'anal gufa loy samu lev lahastira. Yeah, lastiris. I'm sorry. Sheba hatsuyan li'il b'zel lazeh. You're quoting a bunch of maimorim, and you're not even recognizing that there's contradictions even in those places that you're quoting. And for sure, other places that are contradictions. Ulishitosam haklotzkasha barogil bekama mekemes badmuram soi udeloi kanal v'loi hishmit hakanal. According to your shita, there's a klotzkasha. The Amitla Rebbe says in Maimorim, he speaks a whole beer, then he says udeloi kanal, and he didn't erase the canal. If it's Lake Canal, why didn't he erase what he wrote before? That even though Tanoim will bring sometimes a swara lehepich, they still leave the Mishnah Reshena in place, even though there's a Mishnah Achrena. So according to you, since there's a stira, they should erase the original swara. For ulai sof sof, Ya'ainu b'reisha Tanya b'hagah. And maybe sof you'll finally delve in looking at the beginning of Tanya in the Hagah, v'ayim ponim l'teir. That there's 70 ways to explain Teir. Okay, so here, right, what I said before, right away, the nuances, the Rebbe is not going to go into, in other words, start bringing stiras from one place to another. That's not the Indian here. Nevertheless, just the Shlemus the Rebbe did answer. He wrote, Etzem HaTainug, the Ein Shaykh Leimer al Zeh Sherish V'Iker, Ukiyetz B'Zeh Ki'im Rak al Derech Shem HaMushel, V'Gam Zeh Tzorech In Godlim Shaykh. In other words, the Etzem HaTainug, that Rotzen doesn't have, basically. Now, something Rotzen has that Einig has that Rotzen doesn't have. By Rotzen, you could say Sherish, Iker, or other Lashenis. So in other words, there's something in the Tainug that doesn't exist in Rotzen. So you have a big chiddush here from the Rebbe on this. But the point I wanted to make, of course, was the Rebbe is refusing to allow himself to get engaged, have to be metavich, and reconcile every maimer and so on. And that there's a concept where the Mitler Rebbe could say in Indian, then says the Loy Canal, and continues on and leaves the canal, because everything had different svaras. And it's important in Shleimus Indian to see the different nuance to the different svaras. With this, we conclude these 10 Heiros. I want to just say in a final note here the following. The whole point that I was doing this is because this was not done when we were Bochrim or Jungelite. And I felt that, today, especially today, there's a lot of challenges. And the more we can get Hadrocho and direction, not just, as I said before today, not just Yediyas. Yediyas you're learning all the time. You're learning Shulchan Aruch, you're learning Halachas, you're learning Chassidus, that's Yediyas. What you want to really come away with is what I call methodology. Not just what to learn, but how to learn. How to respond to a question, or they read it, and so on. But what happens if you have a question that is not clearly ever addressed? Do you know how to answer it? One of the big things for a Pesach, especially Bizmanenu with all the new technologies, is not just to know the ideas of halacha. You have to know to apply it to a new situation. How do you deal with Shabbos elevator? How do you deal with new biological breakthroughs? Genetic engineering, heart transplants, IVF, in vitro fertilization, all kinds of new things that didn't exist amal. Who's the mother? If a mother is the egg, the donor, and the one that's carrying it is another person. Disallowed, not allowed. Now, in Zman Moshe Rabbeinu, even Zman 100 years ago, it didn't exist. But that doesn't mean we create new Teda Hadrocho. You have to take the Yesodis and apply. That's called how to learn, not just what to learn. Because what? You could say, 1 second, there's no Shabbos over there. I don't know what to do. That's not true. Halacha is versatile enough and has a methodology. There's Yud Gimel Midrash Ater in the Dreshas Behem. That tells you a method. Like, for example, I think I mentioned this, maybe I didn't. The Rebbe got involved in Piskei Dinim very rarely. He always said, I'm not a Pesach, Shgot HaRov. The Rebbe got involved twice, maybe more than twice, but a few times. And he said, why? He said, not because I want to get involved in Halacha, in Piskei Dinim, but because this is an inyan that I happen to have knowledge in, and the Rabbanim may not have that knowledge, so I'm coming with the knowledge. And the first two things, there were probably, I don't know how many exactly, but two for sure, was the first time the questions came up about microphones and about the radio, about using them. Obviously, Shabbos, you're not allowed to use it, but not Shabbos. But they're different things. Can you use a microphone, for example, from Mikra Megillah? Is it, so the question really is not whether you need the Keilodom. Same thing with Shefer. Hypothetically, let's say somebody left the television or radio on. Can they hear Yetzer Shefer in their house by hearing it being blown over the radio? Okay, I'm not getting into other shilas whether it's allowed or not. Beside the chilul, but that's a minyan. Is it? So when it comes to limud Torah, Talmud Torah, so it's very clear. Talmud Torah is not a chiyuv of keilodom. If you hear Torah on the radio or on a telephone, you're even chayiv in bichas Torah, because Torah is the knowledge of Torah. You're learning Torah. You don't need the keilodom. It could be a tape recorder even. However, Mikra Megillah, which is there's a hekesh between Mikra Megillah and Shefer. There we have the Mishnah, the weird Mishnah, but it's now relevant. Right? Now, who would be standing inside of a beir and blowing Shefer? It's like a hechetimtza that never really happened. But we learn from that something. Because it could be an echo, a bas kol, you're not Yetzer. Because you're not hearing the Shefer directly, you're hearing it through the beir. So the Rebbe says, hearing Shefer, or Megillah for that matter, through technology. So if you think technology is a pipe, then okay. But technology is not a pipe. It transforms the Keil Adam into electrical impulses. Then on the second side of the matchis, meaning on the other receiving end, it turns it back in. So it's not Keil Adam anymore. It sounds like the Keil Adam. It's like a copy. But it's not actual Keil Adam. So the Rebbe said, because he knew the laws of electrical engineering, what exactly is a microphone, what exactly is a radio, the Rebbe brought that in. Same thing, second thing was the ships in Israel that were riding on Shabbos. The Rebbe was also, he knew naval engineering, all the issues about when, obviously you're allowed to be on a ship on Shabbos if it took sail before, but there's all kinds of other questions. Can you heat it up? Can you make it move? And that's where the Rebbe also weighed in. The point I'm making here, what is the point I'm making? That the Torah, same thing I want to apply to Primus HaTorah. The how, not just the what. From the Rebbe, we have answers to different situations, whether it's about Shalom Bayis, whether it's about business, whether it's personal issues. But you really want to go away knowing a how. How do you answer a question? And what do you do when you don't have a direct hira from the Rebbe Beferish Hazeh? How do you medama milsa lemilsa, or maven david metech david? How do you take something that Rebbe said somewhere else and understand the hashkaf of it, the derech, the mahalach of the Rebbe, and then apply it? Kemuven shkiyas miyavin, we could all make mistakes, but when you know the how, it changes a lot in our whole approach and how to answer questions and so on, which is very negated today. And I'll be honest, most people don't know how to do it, even Chassidus She'idin. They know that Rebbe said something, fine, we'll listen, folk. But how to derive, that's a whole other story. And I can give examples, but I think that's enough. And if you have any questions on this, I'm happy to take right now, or if not, we will resume and continue. Any shilas? Okay. Stretch. We'll stop here. Good.